I brought them millions of dollars. They called me family, until one day, the boss's daughter, my wife, was caught with, "I still hate him." And guess what? In a single day, they publicly fired me and humiliated me, their own son-in-law. I lost everything but not my honor. And for that, I made them. When I first walked through the heavy glass doors of Bennett Technologies, I didn't think much beyond the opportunity staring me in the face. A chance to prove myself, to show that I could bring real change to a company that was already respected but quietly falling behind the cutting edge of innovation. I wasn't born into wealth or privilege. Everything I had, every skill sharpened and every door cracked open, had come from years of grinding work, sleepless nights, and sheer stubbornness when the world made it clear that no one was waiting to hand me anything. And now, here I was, offered a key position in a company that could open the kind of doors I had once only dreamed about standing in front of. When I met her, I thought she was just another executive's daughter, privileged, polished, out of touch with the actual day-to-day grind of the business world. But it didn't take long to realize I had misjudged her. Madeline wasn't just sitting in her father's shadow. She was smart, strategic, and despite her glossy exterior, there was a fierce hunger in her that matched my own. We were thrown together on a project, an overhaul of the company's aging cybersecurity systems. It was a slow, inevitable pull, a glance held a little too long across a conference table, a brush of fingers when passing laptops back and forth, a shared smirk over some bureaucratic absurdity. By the time we realized how far we had crossed the line, it was already too late. Dating the boss's daughter probably wasn't the smartest move I had ever made, but when Madeline looked at me, I didn't care. When Charles Bennett found out, and of course he found out, because men like him always have a dozen eyes and ears tucked into the corners of their empires, he didn't rage, didn't threaten, didn't even look particularly surprised. He invited me to dinner instead. A quiet restaurant on the waterfront, dim lighting, white tablecloths, and the kind of wine list that made my throat tighten just thinking about the prices. Madeline wasn't there, just Charles and me. He poured 2 glasses of some absurdly expensive red and slid one across the table to me with a steady hand. "You're making my daughter happy," he said, as if commenting on the weather. I opened my mouth, not sure if I was supposed to confirm it or deny it, but he waved a hand to cut me off. "I'm not a sentimental man, Ethan," he continued. "I built everything you see because I learned early that trust is a currency more valuable than any dollar figure. I trusted my instincts. I trusted the people who proved they deserved it." He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping just enough that the world outside our table seemed to disappear. "You've done good work here. Real work. You've pushed this company into the future when it was content to coast on its name. I don't pretend to like many people, but I respect results. And you, Ethan, have delivered." I swallowed hard, the wine forgotten in my hand. "Thank you, sir," I said, because what else could you say to a man like Charles Bennett? He nodded, sharp and satisfied. "Which is why," he said, tapping his finger lightly against the table, "at your wedding, I intend to make it official. Half the company will belong to Madeline, and by extension, to you." The room seemed to tilt for a second, the weight of his words slamming into me with more force than any blow could have. A seat at a table that people spent entire lifetimes trying to even glimpse. I managed a nod, my throat too tight for anything else. Charles smiled, thin, knowing, and lifted his glass. "To family," he said. I clinked my glass against his, the sound sharp and final. And just like that, my life changed forever. The months leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of meetings, late-night strategy sessions, and whispered conversations about the future, not just ours, but the company's as well. Madeline threw herself into both with the kind of relentless determination that made it impossible not to believe in her vision, and together we shaped something stronger than either of us could have built alone. Bennett Technologies wasn't just stabilizing anymore, it was thriving. New contracts, expanded partnerships, early murmurs from industry insiders who whispered that the old guard was about to become the new standard. Every metric that mattered was climbing. Every competitor who had once dismissed us as a relic was now scrambling to keep up. Charles watched it all with the cool satisfaction of a man who had gambled wisely and was now reaping the rewards. Sometimes, I caught him watching me, like a craftsman studying a tool he wasn't quite ready to hand over, but knew he would have to eventually. The night before the wedding, he pulled me aside. We stood on the balcony of his sprawling estate, the city skyline glittering in the distance like a promise. He handed me a small box, no ceremony, no speech, and when I opened it, inside was a pin. Real gold, by the weight of it. "Sign your life with something that means something," he said, voice low and even. I nodded, slipping the pin into my jacket pocket, understanding more than he said, and less than I should have. The wedding was a masterpiece, tailored, polished, every detail curated to project exactly the right image. The guest list read like a who's who of the tech and finance world, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing at the edge of the room hoping to be noticed. I was at the center, next to Madeline, radiant and fierce in a dress that must have cost more than my first 3 cars combined. I felt untouchable, like we had already won, and the rest of the world just hadn't caught up yet. Charles gave a toast that night. He raised his glass high, his voice cutting clean through the murmur of expensive laughter and clinking silverware. "Today isn't just about family," he said. "It's about the future. About the people who will carry forward what we've built with our hands, our blood, our sacrifices." He looked directly at me then, not at Madeline, not at the assembled guests, but at me. "Ethan," he said, his voice steady as a blade, "welcome to the family." And just like that, the deal was sealed. After the wedding, it wasn't just symbolic. Documents were signed. Shares were transferred. Madeline officially owned half of Bennett Technologies. Our names were linked in 1,000 ways now, legally, financially, irrevocably. "We moved into a house gifted by Charles, an investment in your future," he said, though the iron fences and discreet security systems said it was about protection as much as generosity. For a while, it was everything I had ever wanted. Work was brutal but exhilarating. Home was warm and full of laughter, late dinners, lazy Sunday mornings tangled in sheets and soft light. Madeline and I dreamed louder now, bolder, speaking of expansion, acquisitions, even starting our own venture division within the company once we had fully taken the reins. It felt inevitable, unstoppable. And when Madeline told me she was pregnant, standing in the kitchen barefoot in one of my old t-shirts, her hands cradling the tiny swell of her stomach, I thought maybe, just maybe, life had finally decided to reward me for all those years spent clawing my way up from nothing. I lifted her off the ground, spinning her until she shrieked with laughter, and promised her, in the tiny life growing inside her, that I would build a world they could be proud of. And I meant it. With every piece of me, I meant it. Because back then, I still believed that hard work, loyalty, and love were enough to keep the world from falling apart. For now, the future looked bright enough to blind me, and I was foolish enough to stare straight into it without blinking. There are certain moments in life that feel so perfect, so meticulously constructed, that you don't question whether they're real. You simply accept them with the blind gratitude of someone too thirsty to wonder if the water might be poisoned. The months following our wedding felt like living inside one of those moments. Bennett Technologies was flourishing. New contracts, faster development cycles, strategic partnerships that had once seemed unattainable, all of it moving into place like pieces on a chessboard we controlled. Madeline and I worked side by side in ways that most couples couldn't have managed without tearing themselves apart. Where I was methodical, she was visionary. Where I pressed for risk management, she pushed for expansion. It worked. We worked. And standing behind us was Charles Bennett, watching, weighing, calculating. He didn't involve himself much anymore. Instead, he spent more time at home or traveling under the pretense of semi-retirement, though no one was foolish enough to believe Charles Bennett could ever truly step away from a battlefield he had ruled for decades. Still, he let the illusion linger. He let the city believe that Madeline and I were the new heart of Bennett Technologies, the fresh blood steering the company toward an even greater future. And in many ways, we were, until the day he made it official. It happened in the grand boardroom on the 26th floor, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a view designed not for admiration, but for intimidation. The room was filled with the company's top executives, legal counsel, and a few key investors whose faces tightened slightly when they realized they were about to witness the kind of power shift that could alter fortunes in ways they might not control. Madeline stood beside me, a calm force in a tailored navy suit, her hand resting lightly on the polished table, her expression unreadable. Charles entered last, flanked by his longtime advisor, a silent man named Harris who spoke only when absolutely necessary. There were no pleasantries. Charles went straight to business. He outlined, in precise, deliberate language, the formal transfer of half the company's ownership to Madeline Bennett Sullivan. There was a folder. Documents. Pins passed back and forth with the kind of ceremonial gravity usually reserved for treaties or declarations of war. Madeline signed first, her signature swift and confident. Then Charles. And then, though it wasn't legally necessary, he handed the pin to me. Not because the papers required my signature, but because the moment did. Because power, real power, is as much about the stories people tell as the facts they know. I signed my name with the heavy gold pin he had given me before the wedding, the weight of it grounding me, steadying my hand even as something deep in my gut stirred uneasily. There were smiles after. Applause, even. Madeline turned toward me, her eyes shining in the fluorescent light, and for a moment, it was easy to believe in the perfection of it all. Charles clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You've earned your place here, Ethan," he said, his voice low but carrying easily across the room. "This company, this family, it's yours to help lead now. Make sure you remember what it cost to build it." I nodded, because I understood what he was really saying. Loyalty wasn't optional. It was the foundation of everything. And now, it was expected in return, absolute, unquestioning, unwavering. The following weeks passed in a dizzying rush. New initiatives, public announcements, a series of carefully curated interviews where Madeline and I spoke in polished, confident tones about innovation, legacy, the future. We were the golden couple, the unstoppable force, the perfect story for a world hungry for narratives that smelled like success. Behind closed doors, Charles began stepping back even further. Meetings he once would have dominated were now quietly handed off to us. Decisions that once required his explicit approval were deferred with little more than a nod. The future was ours. About what Madeline was pregnant, we didn't tell anyone right away. It was ours for a while, our secret hope, our private joy. But Charles found out anyway, of course he did. Nothing stayed hidden from him for long. And when he did, his reaction wasn't just approval, it was something deeper, something almost tender in a man who had spent most of his life wearing armor made of ambition and disdain. He started talking about legacy. He spent more time with Madeline, fussing over her health, insisting she delegate more at work. He took me aside one evening after a late board meeting and clapped me on the back so hard I nearly staggered. "The company will be yours," he said. No longer a hint, no longer a promise whispered between lines. All of it, not just half. I blinked at him, stunned. "When?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, a rare, real smile that made him look almost young again. "When the baby comes," he said simply. "It's time." And for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe, finally, I had found a place where loyalty and love could coexist, where hard work would be rewarded, where family meant something more than blood and money. I was wrong, but that, too, was still ahead. For now, there was only the glow of future promises, the hum of victory thrumming in my veins, and the quiet, dangerous certainty that nothing could take it away. The months that followed moved with a strange, golden kind of momentum, as if the world itself had conspired to smooth every obstacle out of our path. Madeline's pregnancy became the gravitational center around which everything orbited, our conversations, our plans, our late-night whispers about nursery colors and baby names. Charles, who had once been the towering, immovable force behind Bennett Technologies, seemed almost to shrink in those days, his attention shifting from quarterly earnings and acquisition targets to baby monitors and prenatal vitamins. It was surreal, seeing a man who had commanded boardrooms with nothing but a glance now hovering anxiously over crib assembly instructions or researching the safest brand of infant car seats. He was happy. We were happy. And the company, fueled by the momentum we had created together, continued to thrive. I was working longer hours than ever, not because anyone demanded it, but because it mattered now more than ever that I lay the groundwork for the life we were about to bring into the world. Madeline's role shifted slightly as her due date approached, fewer late nights, more video conferences taken from the sunlit kitchen table while she cradled her growing belly with one hand and typed furious notes with the other. She was radiant, the kind of glow that came not just from the pregnancy itself, but from the certainty that everything she had ever wanted was finally within reach. Sometimes, when I came home late after a grueling day at the office, I would find her asleep on the couch, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, the TV humming low in the background. I would stand there for long minutes, just watching her breathe, overwhelmed by a mixture of love, awe, and something smaller, quieter, that I didn't yet have a name for. Everything seemed so perfect that to question it would have felt like blasphemy. The company's successes kept piling up, a breakthrough in cybersecurity protocols that caught the attention of several major banks, a partnership deal with a leading tech conglomerate that had once been our fiercest rival. Charles, true to his word, began the slow, deliberate process of transferring more operational control into my hands. He still attended major meetings, still maintained the public image of the titan at the helm, but behind closed doors, he was grooming me for full leadership. "You're the future," he said one night after a particularly grueling session with the senior engineers. We stood in the parking garage, the smell of hot asphalt and motor oil hanging heavy in the air. "You and Madeline both. I built this empire for my family, and soon it will be yours to protect." I nodded, the words settling heavily on my shoulders, and I wore it gladly. When Oliver was born, a shrieking, perfect bundle of life and possibility, everything else faded into a kind of brilliant, overwhelming background noise. Holding him for the first time was like being rewired from the inside out. His tiny fingers curled instinctively around mine, and in that instant, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every hard decision I had ever made crystallized into a single, undeniable truth. This was what it had all been for. Madeline cried when she held him, tears of pure joy and exhaustion sliding down her cheeks. Charles stood at the foot of the hospital bed, his usually impassive face crumpling for just a moment into something unguarded. "Welcome to the world, Oliver," he said hoarsely. "You have no idea how much we've been waiting for you." We brought Oliver home to a house that had been transformed while we were at the hospital. New furniture, gifts piled high, a nursery so meticulously prepared it looked like it belonged in the pages of a luxury catalog. Charles had overseen it all personally. He moved into the guest house on the property temporarily, insisting that he wanted to be close enough to help but far enough not to intrude. For the first few weeks, it was exactly what he promised, a gentle, constant presence that allowed us to breathe a little easier during those chaotic, sleepless nights. He held Oliver with a tenderness that made something ache deep in my chest. He beamed with pride every time someone, family, friends, employees, commented on the strength of our family, the legacy we were continuing. It should have been the happiest time of my life. In many ways, it was. But there were small things, little moments, that didn't quite fit. I noticed them first in passing. The way Charles sometimes looked at Oliver with a frown that he quickly masked. The way Madeline would grow strangely tense when Charles asked casual questions about the pregnancy, about timing, about dates I thought had been long settled. The way Harris, Charles's longtime advisor, began attending more meetings than necessary, his sharp eyes lingering too long on documents he was supposedly only skimming. I chalked it all up to exhaustion, to the natural friction that comes with transition, with shifting power dynamics, with a growing family. Because the alternative, the idea that anything darker lurked beneath the surface, was unthinkable. It wasn't until the night Charles called me into his office after dinner, his face carved from stone, his hands folded carefully on the desk between us, that I realized the ground under my feet was no longer solid. "Ethan," he said, voice flat, almost mechanical. "We need to talk." And though he hadn't said anything yet, though no accusations had been spoken aloud, I felt the chill of it in my bones. Something was coming that would change everything. Charles didn't offer me a drink. He just stared at me for a long moment, his hands steepled in front of him, his mouth a thin, grim line. "You've done a lot for this family," he said finally, each word weighed and measured before it left his mouth. "For this company." I nodded, unsure whether I was being praised or prepared for something worse. "And I had every intention," he continued, his voice tightening, "of handing you everything. But I can't," he said, the words falling into the room like stones. I blinked at him, confused. "Sir, Charles, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady even as my heart began to hammer painfully against my ribs. He slid a folder across the desk toward me. "Open it," he said. With fingers that didn't feel entirely like my own, I pulled it toward me and flipped it open. Inside were several sheets of paper, medical documents, some names I recognized, others I didn't. And one word, circled in red ink so hard it had torn the paper: paternity. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. "Oliver," Charles said quietly, almost kindly, "isn't your son." The words didn't make sense at first. They sounded wrong, distorted, like they had passed through too many layers of air before reaching my ears. I looked back down at the papers, trying to make the letters rearrange themselves into something else, something harmless. But they didn't. They stayed the same. "There was a tip," Charles said. "An anonymous message." At first, I ignored it. Thought it was some disgruntled employee or jealous investor stirring trouble. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. But it didn't go away, and when I started looking, he gestured vaguely toward the folder. There it was, plain as day. My throat was so tight I could barely force the words out. "You think I knew?" I asked, hating the raw edge of desperation in my voice. Charles didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was with the kind of brutal honesty that left no room for argument. "I don't know what you knew," he said. "And frankly, it doesn't matter. Perception is reality in this world, Ethan. And the perception now is that you either lied or you were played for a fool." He stood then, coming around the desk to stand in front of me. "Neither is acceptable," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Not for my daughter. Not for my company. Not for my legacy." I felt the floor tilt under me, the world sliding sideways. "What are you saying?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "You're out," he said simply. "Effective immediately." I stared at him, unable to move, unable to breathe. "The board has already been briefed," he continued, his tone flat, businesslike. "The public announcement will frame it as a mutual decision. You're stepping down to pursue other opportunities, to focus on family during this transitional time." The irony of it almost made me laugh. Family. The word felt poisonous now. And the shares. I managed to choke out. Charles smiled then, a thin, humorless thing that didn't reach his eyes. "You signed the prenuptial agreements, Ethan. Madeline retains full control. Half a company, soon to be whole again." I thought about arguing and dragging the whole rotten truth into the light and setting fire to everything we had built. But looking at Charles, at the cold certainty in his eyes, at the finality carved into every line of his face, I knew it would be useless. He wasn't just cutting me out. He was erasing me. I was nothing now. I don't remember walking out of his office. Just remember the weight of it settling over me like a shroud. Heavy, suffocating, absolute. By the time I stumbled into the empty apartment I hadn't yet had time to furnish, it was almost morning. The city outside my window was waking up, traffic beginning to hum, lights blinking to life in 1,000 anonymous windows, and I sat there in the darkness, staring at the wall, feeling like I had stepped outside of my own body. I had built their empire, had saved their legacy, had given everything I had to make them stronger. And when the illusion cracked, when the truth threatened their story, they hadn't hesitated to bury me under it. And the worst part? They would tell the world that it was my fault. And the world, eager for a clean narrative, for villains and heroes in neat, palatable packages, would believe them. Unless I gave them a better story. In the days that followed my dismissal, it became painfully clear that Charles and Madeline had prepared for this far more thoroughly than I could have imagined. The narrative was clean, polished, and surgically precise. Ethan Sullivan, the rising star of Bennett Technologies, had decided to step down voluntarily after internal disagreements about the company's future direction. There were no mentions of scandal, no hints of betrayal, just a vague cloud of personal differences that left the door open for endless speculation. And speculation came quickly, first in whispers among the employees who had once greeted me with respect and admiration, their eyes now sliding away from mine when they passed me on the street. Then in subtle, sourceless rumors that began creeping into industry newsletters and tech blogs, carefully worded suggestions that maybe I hadn't been as integral to the company's success as I had seemed, that maybe I had been riding Madeline's coattails all along. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. They could spin whatever story they needed to protect their empire. It didn't change the truth. But it didn't stop there. A week after I left, a new rumor surfaced, this time aimed not just at my professional reputation, but at my character. It started with an article on a second-tier gossip site, the kind of publication that traded in scandal and half-truths, but it spread like wildfire. Anonymous sources close to the family claimed that I had been unfaithful throughout my marriage, that I had betrayed Madeline's trust, that the reason for my departure had been personal, not professional, a messy, sordid affair that they had graciously decided to keep private out of respect for the child involved. The first time I saw the headline, "Inside the Scandal at Bennett Technologies, Rising Stars Fall from Grace," I nearly laughed. The absurdity of it, the sheer audacity. But laughter didn't last long, because it didn't matter that it wasn't true. It didn't matter that the real betrayal had come from them. In the court of public opinion, perception was reality, and they had crafted a narrative where I was not just expendable, but deserving of exile. Overnight, doors that had once opened eagerly for me slammed shut. Potential employers grew suddenly cold, promising to circle back and never calling again. Investors who had once fought to get a seat at my table now whispered about concerns regarding character and brand optics. Could have gone to the press, aired every dirty secret, but I knew how that would look. It would only feed the narrative they had already spun, the image of a bitter, broken man trying to tear down what he couldn't have. And besides, they were too powerful. Every move I made would be met with a dozen countermoves, each one designed to bury me deeper. So I stayed silent for now. I played the role they had written for me, the humbled, defeated ex, and let them believe they had won. Because sometimes the only way to destroy an enemy who thinks they have already beaten you is to let them grow comfortable. And Madeline, for all her cunning, had always had a blind spot when it came to victory. She celebrated too soon. It was a week after the article broke that she called me. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, won out. "Ethan," she said when I picked up, her voice low and syrupy with false regret. "I know things have been hard." I didn't answer. She rushed to fill the silence. "There's going to be a party next weekend," she said. "For Oliver's birthday. A small thing, just family and friends. Charles wants you there." I nearly dropped the phone, the absurdity of it hitting me so hard I had to grip the edge of the counter to stay upright. She wanted me, the man she had framed, the man they had vilified, to show up and smile for the cameras. "We think," she continued, her voice dropping into something almost conspiratorial, "it would be good for appearances if you apologized publicly. Said a few words about regretting your mistakes, about wanting to move on." I closed my eyes, breathing slowly through the surge of rage that threatened to choke me. They didn't just want to destroy me. They wanted me to destroy myself. To confess to crimes I hadn't committed. To validate the lie they had built their new kingdom upon. "And if I do?" I asked, my voice flat. She hesitated, just long enough for me to hear the calculation ticking behind her words. "Maybe," she said lightly, "Charles would reconsider certain arrangements. Maybe there's still a place for you somewhere." She left it hanging there, like a poisoned fruit just out of reach. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. A slow, dangerous smile that felt alien on my face after so many months of grief and betrayal. "I'll be there," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." "Good," she said. "I knew you'd come to your senses." I ended the call before she could say anything else. Then I sat down at the small, battered desk by the window. If they wanted me to wear the mask of the villain, fine. I would show them just how dangerous a real villain could be. The day of Oliver's birthday party arrived with the kind of bright, cloudless sky that felt almost mocking, as if the universe itself had conspired to make everything seem perfect from the outside, while inside I carried the quiet weight of what was about to happen. I dressed carefully, choosing the same style of suit I had worn to countless Bennett corporate events, tailored but understated, professional without being flashy. The house, when I arrived, was exactly as I remembered it, sprawling, gleaming, manicured within an inch of its life. Guests milled about the front lawn, laughing too loudly, sipping champagne from delicate flutes. Madeline spotted me before I even made it up the front steps. She broke away from a small knot of friends and crossed the distance with a smile so bright and brittle it could have cut glass. "Ethan," she said, her voice pitched high with performative warmth. "You made it." I returned her smile with one of my own, the kind I had perfected over years of corporate diplomacy, just warm enough to seem genuine, just cold enough to make her wonder what I was thinking. "Wouldn't miss it," I said smoothly, letting my gaze drift casually over the assembled crowd. She lowered her voice, stepping closer. "Remember what we discussed," she murmured. "When Charles makes the toast, that's your moment." I nodded, as if obedient, as if broken. As if I hadn't spent the past week preparing for exactly this. Inside, the house buzzed with energy. Streamers crisscrossed the ceilings, tables groaned under the weight of catered food, and a giant banner stretched across the living room declared in cheerful block letters, "Happy first birthday, Oliver." There were children running through the halls, shrieking with sugar-fueled glee, and parents standing in tight circles, exchanging the kind of small talk that barely concealed the competitive glint in their eyes. It was the perfect scene. Picture perfect. Exactly the image Charles and Madeline needed the world to see. I moved through it all like a ghost, exchanging nods, shaking hands, accepting drinks I didn't touch, waiting and watching. On the second floor, tucked away in the guest room that had once been my office, Madeline's laptop sat on a sleek glass desk. I knew because I lived here, of course. I slipped away during the cake cutting, the perfect distraction, all eyes turned toward the laughing, candlelit chaos at the center of the room. No one noticed as I moved upstairs, careful, silent, just another guest on an errand. The door to the guest room wasn't locked. Of course it wasn't. Why would it be? In this house, trust was still the illusion they clung to. I closed the door softly behind me, my heart hammering with a steady, controlled rhythm. The laptop was open but asleep, a gentle glow behind the screensaver. I woke it with a tap, entered the password, Madeline's birthday, unchanged, and watched the desktop bloom to life. The software I had created over the past month was simple, elegant, devastating. A custom Trojan, designed to infiltrate the company's core security protocols through the internal network Madeline's laptop automatically connected to whenever she was home. It wouldn't destroy anything, wouldn't raise immediate alarms. It would simply create a backdoor, a subtle, almost invisible vulnerability that linked every financial transaction, every protected database, every encrypted file straight to her device. It would look like an accident, a betrayal from within. And when the authorities inevitably traced the breach, when the bank screamed and the regulators descended, it wouldn't be me standing in the crosshairs. It would be Madeline and Charles. It would be every smug, smiling face downstairs who had thought they could cut me out and walk away untouched. I launched the program and watched as the lines of code began weaving their quiet, inevitable path through the network. It took less than 5 minutes to burn their kingdom to the ground. I closed the laptop gently, then I straightened my jacket, adjusted my cuffs, and walked back downstairs into the roar of laughter and applause. Charles stood in the center of the living room, holding a glass high, his face flushed with wine and victory. He saw me and beckoned, a wide, magnanimous gesture. "Ethan, come, join us," he called. I crossed the room slowly, feeling every gaze slide toward me, feeling the heat of expectation build with every step. This was the moment, the part where I was supposed to apologize, to bow my head and beg for forgiveness for crimes I hadn't committed. Charles clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard. "Say a few words," he said, his voice dripping with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had already won. I took the offered microphone, letting the silence stretch just a fraction longer than was comfortable. Then I smiled, warm, open, the picture of contrition, and spoke. "Thank you all for being here today," I said, my voice steady. "It's a joy to celebrate Oliver and the family that brought him into this world." A murmur of approval rippled through the room. I caught Madeline's eye, saw the slight nod, the encouragement, and for a moment, I almost laughed. "Families," I continued, letting my gaze sweep the room, "aren't just built on blood. They're built on trust and loyalty." I raised my glass. "To Oliver," I said, and then I drank. The room erupted in applause, laughter, the clinking of glasses. They didn't see the fuse already burning beneath their feet. But they would soon, very soon. It didn't happen overnight. The first sign came 3 days after the party. A quiet internal alert, flagged by a lower-level security analyst who didn't have the authority to do anything more than escalate it up the chain. By the time it reached Charles, the damage had already been done. Massive, untraceable transactions had begun siphoning funds out of the company's reserve accounts, threading through dozens of shell corporations, bouncing across jurisdictions faster than their legal team could react. The banks were the next to notice. Accounts frozen, investigations launched, the government followed. Regulatory bodies descended like vultures, demanding audits. And when the cybersecurity experts traced the breach back to its origin, when they found the digital fingerprints embedded in the very protocols that Madeline's laptop had accessed, there was no doubt where the trail ended. Madeline's device. The news broke like a tidal wave, crashing over every corner of the company's carefully curated image. Front-page articles screamed about insider sabotage, security failures, potential collusion, and massive financial crimes. Charles tried to contain it at first. He threw lawyers at it, PR firms, hush money in every direction he could manage. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Madeline's tearful denials only fueled the fire, her carefully constructed image of the dutiful daughter and brilliant executive unraveling in real time under the relentless glare of public scrutiny. And Charles, proud, unbreakable Charles, watched as everything he had spent his life building turned to ash in his hands. I stayed away from it all, watched from a distance as the world devoured them. There was no satisfaction in their suffering, only the quiet, steady certainty that justice, real justice, had finally found them. It was almost poetic how quickly their allies turned. Investors who had once lined up for a seat at the table now demanded accountability. Partners severed ties, employees fled. The company's stock plummeted, hemorrhaging value with every new revelation. Within 2 months, Bennett Technologies was under full federal investigation. By the 3rd month, Charles and Madeline were indicted. And when the day came that law enforcement raided their offices, I sat alone in a cafe 2 blocks away, sipping coffee, watching the world they had built fall apart. No one noticed me, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Before the investigations, before the collapse, before the lawyers could even begin to untangle the financial knots I had tied around them, I had already secured my future. The funds siphoned during the breach were safely tucked away in accounts scattered across countries that didn't ask questions, countries that valued discretion over extradition treaties. Cryptocurrency washed through privacy coins, converted, laundered, reborn. When the time was right, I bought a ticket under a new name, to a place where the sun was warm and the questions were few. Just a man who had once believed too deeply in loyalty, learning at last how to believe in freedom instead. The plane lifted off the runway with a rumble that shook through my bones, and as the city disappeared beneath the clouds, I let go of the last pieces of the life I had left behind. No more regret, only the clean, sharp air of a new beginning. Now the road ahead was wide open, untouched by the broken promises and poisoned loyalties that had once defined me. Thank you for watching. Sometimes, the people who build your world are the same ones who bury the knife in your back. But real strength isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go, walk away, and rebuild something that no one can ever take from you again.